What happens when two seasoned business leaders get together? They talk shop, of course. Sit back and listen in as Scott DeLong and Vince Moiso share from their experience around current issues facing executives, entrepreneurs, and their leadership teams. The CEO Podcast starts now.
Hey everybody, Scott DeLong with the CEO Podcast. I'm here as always with my partner, Vince Moiso.
Hey everybody.
And we have a special guest today, a woman that I met through the group called Impact 11. And we've talked a little bit about Impact 11, which is a group dedicated to helping professional speakers hone their craft and get on bigger stages and get larger audiences and all that. And I've learned a lot from that group. But what the group's really done for me is that it's introduced me to a lot more interesting people. Not that I don't meet interesting people with my client base, but these are folks that are doing the same kind of work that I do, and it challenges me to think a little bit differently. So we're going to start having a few more guests from that group, and Susan happens to be one of them. She happened to be sitting next to me at this gala that we were at back in December, and I hadn't met her before, and I was intrigued. And so we started doing a little research about her, and she runs an organization, Meritage Leadership Coaching. But she's also written a book that we're going to talk a little bit about, and some interesting theories within that book that I really want to dig into because I'm curious. So the name of the book is The Leader's Playlist, and we'll talk a little bit about that. However, Susan, why don't you take a few minutes and introduce yourself and what you do and who you do it for and the impact that you can make.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. Great to spend this time to chat about leadership and music and the intersection and all those things. So, so I have a pretty eclectic background. Most people, when they read, they're like, law, acting, how did that all come together? Well, just a little background. So I went to Harvard Law, did not practice law, decided early on that was not going to be a good path for me, and went from there into consulting. But the thing about law is it's very good at teaching you to make distinctions and recognizing patterns. When you write briefs, you're looking for how is this case like other cases or different, right? So you're doing a lot of work in that arena. And I think that foundational aspect is what fuels the leadership development work I do today, because as opposed to making distinctions in case law, I'm making distinctions in mindset. But also I'm kind of really honing in, looking at patterns. And from law school, I went to strategy consulting at the Boston Consulting Group, did that for a number of years, then went to NBC television, first as a black belt in Six Sigma in the sales and marketing division, which I think that was when I learned, like, you can have the best sort of process in the world, but if the culture doesn't accept it, 100%. You're dead in the water, right? Yep. And that was a very eye-opening experience. I was able to translate that into marketing and business development, but out of those experiences, I came out feeling a little bit like dejected in a way, because none of this was interesting to me. Maybe it's on the surface, but not like deep in my core, like really hungry and passionate about it. And also, I just had some not the greatest experiences in cultures that sucked the life out of you, or managers that weren't very effective. And all of that I just said, I want to do something I'm passionate about. I'm going to take a little bit of break. I know one thing I'm passionate about is acting. So I was in London at the time, and I went to get a master's at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. And people thought I was crazy. And it was definitely a departure. This is 5 years after law school that I'm doing this. But little did I know how much it would impact what I do today, because the work as an actor, you really start to understand that voice inside your head, that inner critic, how to be very present and authentic with others and build that connection. And as I was doing this, I kept thinking, God, some of the leaders I work with could have really used this training, and there's got to be a way I could bring this back to business. And so I did pursue acting for a little bit, but I found actually it was through leadership development that I could bring all of these pieces together. And that's when I got into it more than 20 years ago.
That's a
I'm
story.
really personally, Scott, if I can jump in. So, Susan, I'm just going to say this. I've got to introduce you to my daughter, Viviana. I really hope that she can talk to you. She's 22. She's a senior at the University of San Diego this year. She's music, theater, and English, and avid. She's got the theater and music background, and I can totally relate. But she's fresh off of Intercession in London, by the way, where I think she went to no less than about 20 plays while
Yeah.
she was out there. So she came back, and I picked her up from the airport, and she was just nonstop. Wow, wow, I'm like, oh my gosh, so I can tell, the passion just comes out in her. I'm really interested in the music piece, and I love when I reviewed your background. I love the diversity of your background. I'm a big believer in that, and I have people often say the same thing when they go through my history. They're like, "Wow, like certain things just don't connect, right?" When
Yeah.
actually they do, right? Exactly how
Yes.
you just explained, and I think that's really important. Is those experiences bring out, passion, authenticity, so many things in a way that I think people don't realize. People think, they get tunnel
Yeah.
vision, and they think this is the direction that I have to go for my entire life, when in fact it's not. And each experience is going to bring something else out in you. So I love that. I loved reading about your background. I think it's just fascinating. I think law is so important. I think we can all learn so much from that. I was headed in that direction myself at one point. I thought I was going to go to law school. I did, and I ended up getting an MBA. But nonetheless, like, law is so important, so many different things. I'm most interested, and I know, Scott, you're going to go here, the way that you bring music into your leadership coaching. The reason I brought up my daughter, I've always been a music. I love music. I'm self-taught on the guitar,
Oh
all
my.
sorts of stuff, but I didn't really appreciate it until learning through the eyes of my daughter. So her passion for it, and her passion for acting and theater and all of that, was a learned behavior for me. And I'm so appreciative of being a girl dad in that way, and getting that experience through my daughter. So now I'm thinking to myself, well, wow, how the heck are you bringing, music into this leadership and coaching? So I'm very curious, and I'm ready to learn more. Scott,
Let-
sorry I interrupted you,
no,
but
that's great. I'm going to go there because I'm not a music guy, and it also I know limits me. I use music for one thing in particular, in meditation. So it works for me in one aspect, which is interesting. But I want to explore and expand that a little bit. So talk to us a little bit about how you bring music into your coaching.
Yes. So I use the concept of playlist both figuratively and literally. Which is interesting. So there's two parts to the body of work that I have. On one side is the fact that what I've seen coaching just incredible leaders over the years, and I mean billionaire CEOs, a very high profile political figure, that the way they were responding to whatever was happening didn't have as much to do with what was actually happening in the present, but was triggering some type of belief that got formed way back in
Way back.
childhood.
Absolutely.
And so what I kept saying is our childhood wounds show up in our leadership today.
mm-hmm.
And so what I do is I bring a lot of that, how formative those years are, but how they create these deep-seated neural pathways that have us, it's the way we respond to stress or the way we respond to challenges. On the flip side, then there's a whole body of research that I bring in that shows that music's impact on the brain is quite profound. It's one of the few things that lights up all regions of the brain. And essentially, it's like the analogy I use, it's like a fertilizer to form new neural pathways more quickly. So if I'm interested in making deep behavioral change, if I actually embed something with music, I'm going to be able to make that change more holistically and faster and more efficient. So I brought these two things together to say, look, we know we can use music to shift our state because that's why we work out to music, right? It pumps us up. But we could actually use it to interrupt old triggers and neural pathways that we do not want to continue to go down. I call it the 8-lane highway to hell. And we can use it to build new ways of being, new ways of operating, such that we've shifted our energy more profoundly than just to work out on a treadmill.
Let's stop there for a minute because I want to go back and say, does the type of music matter based on what I want to learn or explore, right? And what pathways? There's different genres, right? And they each have different emotional impact on people. So do you guide folks to the type of music based on what their deep-seated issues?
Yes. It's more about how does the music impact you, and getting very clear about how the messages or feeling that comes from that music is either helping or hindering. So I think sometimes the best way is to give you an example, and I'll talk about a leader who we did this with. So she was a chief marketing officer of a biotech company in the Bay Area, and we use the name Deborah. And she got some feedback that she was being a little too aggressive in trying to insert herself into certain meetings, and would get upset when she wasn't copied on emails from her peers. And her opinion was, look, I'm chief marketing officer. I need to know about what's all going on. And I feel like I'm not being kept in the loop, and this is a problem. What I was interested in is, this is interesting. Is this a pattern in her life, right? And what's coming up for her emotionally when this occurs? Because her response was a little outsized in a way. But I could see her frustration. And I said, when this happens, when you get this email, or when you find out you weren't included in a meeting, what emotions are you feeling? And she would say, I feel angry and I feel frustrated, right? And I feel like I'm being purposely left out. And I said, okay, so where else in your life does that pattern come up? You're angry, frustrated, feeling left out. Well, then we start to unpack it. Like, she's divorced. And when the kids go to the lake house that she used to be, is now in the ex-husband, and she's not going there anymore. And we could trace this back, right, to sororities, to all the way back again to childhood, where her sister got all the attention as the vivacious one, and she was sort of the quiet, shy one, and she often felt left out in situations. So what we did is, so that she could zoom out and see the bigger picture, that this was a pattern, and all it was a neural pathway, again, that's been grooved in so many times, it's an 8-lane highway. And we used music then for her to build more awareness of when it was occurring. So for her, it was like, what does this remind you of in a song or a lyric? And she chose the song Adele's Hello. That's this hello, can you hear me? I've been calling you 1,000 times and you won't pick up the phone. And It's like, wow, yeah. I can understand why the other person wouldn't be picking up the phone. So when she could feel herself getting angry again, she could go, oh my God, okay, there's Adele again. Right? Do I want to be Adele in this circumstance? So she could help her interrupt the pattern. But then the pathway is to build the new neural pathway, right? What do you want to be? What do you want to be instead? And for her, it was, I bring peace and appreciation. That's what she literally wanted, to bring peace and appreciation to her interactions. So that what we did was choose music that had her feel that type of emotion. Right? So she could practice building that neural pathway, which was very different than the other one. Practice being in that state of being. And she had a literal playlist of songs that did that for her.
Are you working exercises while she's listening to this music, or is it just pure listening for the
start
feeling?
her day with it. have one particular anchor song that reminded her before she went into a meeting. She didn't have to necessarily listen to it, but it was like that feeling of
Sure.
it,
Sure.
that feeling of it. Because, ultimately, here's the intersection. Music is vibrational.
No
Emotions are
question.
vibrational.
Oh yeah.
And so that's where that intersection goes. So we can use music then to get us into the state, but also use it to understand where we're getting in our own way.
I'm big on, there's a couple things that came up for me, and I'm so big on music, and I use it in so many different things. I have a playlist for when, I'm working on certain documents, and I just need to get in that focus mode or whatever it is, or whether I'm exercising, if I'm doing yoga, if I'm, like you said, Scott, meditating or anything like
Mhm.
that. And the music does matter. So I guess just in a couple organic examples that came up for me, because music is such a big part of my life. One is football. I played college football. I was lucky enough to continue that career. And now what has shifted, if you fast forward to today, and I've had great opportunity with my own alma mater and another school where I have been involved at arm's length with those football programs. But they now in practice, every practice is blasting music, and the players choose the playlist. It's not the coaches. It's not, oh, I'm going to do, but it's driven, and there's full buy-in from the players, and the level of energy and intensity that comes from that. If you were watching NFL playoffs at all, there was a big story on the San Francisco 49ers, and they walk out of the tunnel with the big boombox now, and then there's a guy that's in charge of the song that's playing for when they're walking out of the tunnel and all that. Is If you don't think that music has an impact on what you do, you're crazy. It's just crazy. And it's funny to me because I read that you bring music, and I hear what you just said, and I'm like, duh, this is so crazy. Is like we've got this music component in every other parts of our life. Why wouldn't it be for this too? Like it's just,
Right.
so making that connection was interesting for me. But the other organic example that I would mention, and I think it's important to mention, and I'm incredibly self-aware, and the best thing that I've been learning about myself in my own 10-year self-development journey is I'm always going to be learning, right? Like this is forever. I'm going to constantly be working on myself. And so I'm very in tune, and I always want to listen and learn more on how I can improve. But what I've learned about music, I like hard old rock, Rage Against the Machine, but I noticed that I have to be really careful because I'll start listening to that and I go to like an angry place, and
Yeah.
Act on it.
I
Sure.
start to go there, and I go, "Oh, whoa, I'm changing the music right now because I have no interest in being in that
Yes.
emotional and mental state right now." So boom, reggae playlist on, Bob Marley, I'm happy, just complete energy and vibration shift. But that's how powerful it is. And I think one of the things that I love that you brought up is that recognition and awareness of the behavior, right? So there's this pattern that happens. And then when you start to associate, music has an incredible association. It's why when we hear that 80s song, we go back to that
You're
one night,
transported, right?
yeah, like
Literally back to a time and place. Mhm.
totally, totally. So, so music association is so powerful. It's really cool. Thank you for sharing
So,
that.
Susan, I'm going to give you a case study here, or a test study, right? So, see, use me as your example. I'm going to be your new client. And I already mentioned that I get myself into a place so that I can meditate, and music does that. It gets me in this peaceful, happy place. I listen to Kenny Chesney for that because I feel like I want to be on the beach. And that kind of music makes me relax. Great.
Yeah.
Where I can't get through this fixed mindset that I have is if I'm working, if I'm writing, if I'm working on some outline for some marketing plan or whatever that I'm doing internally with my own company, I cannot have music playing in the background. I've got a fixed mindset that says that's a
Mm.
distraction instead of an enhancement.
Yeah. That's okay. So I'm not suggesting that you have to have music playing in the background while you're doing these things. For some
Okay.
people, it's helpful. Other people, it's not. They need that focus time. They can't have that noise. What I'm suggesting is what we would do is to say, where do you feel like you're getting stuck in your life that you're bumping up against a ceiling, and let's look at what the emotional belief is behind that, right?
Yeah.
And so the playlist titles that I go in the book are essentially I am statements. You know, I am not supported. I am an imposter, right? I am not safe. And literally it's about recognizing that pattern. So we would look at how else does that show up in your life? What is that? How do we use music then to catch yourself when you're in that place and shift out of it? But it does not mean that you have to use music to work to, but you
Okay.
could use music before an important meeting, right? And to get into the right emotional state that you need to be in.
Well, there's actually a song that fits really well with the work that I do. And I was just driving down the street one day and I was thinking about, okay, what kind of song what if I was going to be a ball player or go up to bat, what's my walk up song? Or on a stage, right? What's my walk up song? And all of a sudden a song came up to me and it's maybe a controversial kind of a artist. It was a Michael Jackson song. It was The Man in the Mirror. And
Yes.
I'm driving down the road, and here I am, this big tough guy, crying because I was looking for something, and this song just happened to hit, and like it's a synergy of that, and it was like, man, that's the way to change the world is change yourself, which is what my message
Yeah.
is, right?
Yeah.
And a song made me cry, like driving down the street because of
Yeah,
Yeah.
how it
music's
happened to
that
me.
powerful though, isn't it though? Like
Oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
that's yeah, I
I
mean,
use that actually at the end of I have a master class on this, and that's the song I use because it
Yeah,
is so powerful. Yeah.
yeah.
it is powerful. No, and it drives emotion in a way that few other mediums do, I think. Susan, there was something interesting that you said in the example that you used, and I thought it was a really great example because you specifically called out a behavioral pattern, right, over years and you talk a lot about how childhood trauma impacts you and I've unpacked and I always found so I'm pretty fresh about 3 weeks ago off of a 3-day really intensive self-development event and just when I thought I had unpacked everything, right? There were a couple other things to unpack and that, I think we're totally oblivious to. And so what in your example, what I love that you're talking about is that behavior of, feeling left out, right? Is what you said. And what I've come to recognize is that's an occurring of what's happening and it's actually not really happening, right? So I think there's an important distinction in that also came up for me when you were giving that example is that we often this behavior that drives us from childhood trauma all the way to us as leaders in businesses that we've created this reality of something that's actually not really happening. Like there's no intention of
Yeah.
leaving us out. There's no intention of
Yeah.
that action. It's just this thing we've created because that's how it's occurring for us.
Yeah.
But what I like that you said is I like and I'm really interested in that. Is I like the idea of attaching that behavior to a song that then gets us to recognition and awareness of the behavior because then once you're aware of the behavior happening you can change it.
Yeah.
Just change it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not just aware of the behavior, but then the effects on you and therefore your effects on others
And
because of
others,
that
yeah,
behavior, right?
yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
almost like that's why I keep using this, when we've learned a pattern, it is like we've grooved it so many times. It's like taking your car on a super freeway. And when we want to learn a new skill, reason it's challenging and hard to break habits is because it's like taking your car off the highway and going through the middle of the woods, right? It's bumpy, it's uncomfortable, but the more you do it and the more you groove that path, the more then you have choice. But here's what I tell people, like that old 8-lane highway, that's never going away because you built it, right? The
Mhm.
trick is how quickly can you catch yourself and take the first exit, and how quickly can you build a new way of addressing that. And what I'm proponent of is music can help you build that road faster
Mhm.
so that you are more at choice when this type of things happen and you're not on automatic pilot, with the trigger, because we all have triggers, right? And that's the key.
Yeah.
So let me see if I understand your analogy a little bit, because I have a little challenge with it. I'd like to work through, and that is let's go down this dirt road that's muddy, right? And we're creating these new pathways, and we're going down them further and further and further, and we're creating deeper and deeper ruts. Can we not get ourselves in trouble with that without the ability to steer out of that rut and create slightly diversion from that? I'm concerned about continuing to go down the same path on something that might not be working as well as something else could be.
Well, sure. That's
how do we
essentially
pattern interrupt using music to pattern interrupt in that case?
Interrupt the bad path. That's why you got to be very intentional about what's the good path that you're trying to create, right? I talk a lot, in my speech about ruts and what a rut is. Do you know what a rut actually is?
Tell me.
It's a pathway in the woods that deer follow, and they. If you're a hunter, from what I understand, I'm not a hunter, what you're looking for are ruts, because that's where the deer are going to go back and forth to go get a food source or a water source. Because if they don't die, they keep just doing that. But the reality is you've exposed yourself. So I, as a hunter, know exactly where to take you down, essentially.
So that rut is a pathway to destruction.
Right. And I think what people don't realize is, when you're stuck in your rut, it feels comfortable, but it actually can be dangerous long-term to what you're really trying to accomplish. And recognizing, like, how is this current one not serving me? And what is something that would serve me better? And how can I use then music to help me get out of that?
So this is a call for the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that Vince does, the kind of work that I do as well, is that too often we are in these ruts because it's comfortable and it's what we know, and we have our blinders on and we can't see things. And it's exactly why you need an outside source, whether it's a friend, a spouse, a coach, whatever that might be, to help you see beyond your current pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, here's the thing. We live in a time of accelerating change and complexity. I mean, our own internal operating systems are essentially ill-equipped to keep up, as they've not evolved as quickly as our environment has. So we need to make changes in order to perform at a new level. And we have to interrupt ourselves and create these new behavioral patterns that will help us achieve the extraordinary that we need to achieve. And I think this sense of overwhelm and frustration that feels more pervasive in society today. This is what I'm talking about, because it's almost like we're trying to run the old operating system on this thing, but we've got all these new apps and we just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so we get frustrated, we get angry. And this is where I'm trying to make the breakthrough that this is important, literally, for humanity.
So there's another path that I want to explore a little bit with you, because I firmly believe in this, and it's not normally a business topic. However, in fact, Vince's company, I went in and did some work with them, and this word came up, the word feelings. You used the word feelings before, and we avoid those things in the corporate world. However, avoiding those feelings is exactly what gets us into trouble and doesn't help us break through things, in my estimation. And why do we discuss feelings when we're talking about coaching in the business world? It's because they're real, they matter. It's what drives people, is that I want to feel this way, I don't want to feel that way kind of concept.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how you incorporate the word feeling into your coaching style.
A different perspective to take on feelings is emotions are also data points. So they're going to give us important information about what's happening. So to disregard them means you're taking a whole data set and ignoring it and dumping it out the window. Here's what I mean by that. I am not suggesting that we just always want to go around happy, happy, let's just put on happy music all the time. Because when something goes wrong, and let's say it triggers an anger response, we want you to feel that, because the gift in anger is to know that a boundary has been crossed.
And change needs to happen.
and that I need to take action in order to reestablish that boundary, right? It's a boundary in values or a belief system. I want to be able to feel that so I know to take the action. If I just pretend that that never happened, then I could continue to get abused, essentially.
Feel it,
But
but not live in it.
but
Right.
not living it over and over and over.
Right.
What I'm really talking about is when we find ourselves in patterns. And this is where I keep going back to patterns because I think this has always been a strong suit of mine, or you would say superpower, is to identify the patterns that are in our way. I mean, it's really, I think about it as how I got through, how I did really well on the LSAT when we take it. I just took 8 practice tests. I noticed the patterns, and I could anticipate the questions that they were going to ask and what the answer would be, and I only missed one on my thing because
That's a
of this.
total
So
superpower. That's
that is
amazing.
my superpower, right? And
That's
so
amazing.
what I'm trying to do is help people say it's not bad that you feel anger or anxiety or whatever it is, but is that a pattern in your life? Can you look at where else that might be occurring? And if it is, do you want to shift that?
So it's recognizing, understanding, and then knowing what to do with it to get to get really what it is that you want out of it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all the emotions have a purpose.
Well,
Yes.
yogi
And
yogi
even the
meditation.
negative emotions have a positive purpose if we
Yes.
look for them, recognize them, and see what we're doing about them. Now, what do we
Yes.
need to do to make the changes that we want to make?
Yeah, exactly.
Scott, yogi meditation will tell you too. It's interesting as you brought that up, Susan, is that anger is a good one.
Yeah.
Because what happens with anger is we resist it. We do two things: we exist it or ignore it, as you pointed out, right? Which is like, I love the analogy of looking at feelings as a set of data points because we can learn from them, right? And understand it better by seeing it that way. And what do? We like I often I know I find myself resisting more than ignoring, right? Which is almost worse. You could argue is
Yeah,
almost worse, right?
me too. Yeah.
And then yogi meditation will tell you not to resist it. Let it happen. It's going to happen. Let the anger come through. And then more importantly, let it go. Right. Like if you can get to a state of letting the emotions or those feelings flow through you, it's pretty incredible. And I try to work on that. But speaking of resistance, I'm also wondering, with some of your clients, do you get, as you discover these patterns, right? What a superpower. That's amazing. And as you discover these patterns, and all of a sudden you're suggesting music as a solution. Do you get resistance? Are you getting resistance at that? Like, is anybody looking at you funny, going, "What are you talking about?" Like, like, so for me, the reason I bring that up is like, I love music. Like if you said that to me, I'd go, yeah, like I would just
Yeah.
connect to
Yeah.
that immediately and go. But then Scott, who doesn't love, he's not a big music guy,
Yeah.
would be looking at you funny, going, I don't know about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm willing to try.
Yeah, I can pique their interest enough. I mean, you think about Alzheimer's patients who
Yeah.
are unresponsive. They put on their favorite music and they just come alive.
Hmm.
There's a measurable increase in eye contact, in smiling, and this can be seen on an MRI where the brain has reformed neural pathways. So usually when I put it in a science term, it's like this is not just a fun thing. Like the science of music on the brain, which is what's in the book, is quite profound. But if somebody truly just doesn't find that music impacts them, which I totally get, it is one tool, but it's a very powerful tool. I use as well the Enneagram a lot in my work,
Yeah, that's
which
great.
just is showing you where you tend to have where your focus of attention goes. And usually I'll use that tool more heavily. I use both, but in those instances, I'll use that tool a little bit more heavily.
So I'm going to challenge something you said there. I think when you say that people just don't resonate with music or it doesn't impact them, I don't believe that's true.
Yeah. Or
I
maybe
think they
can't
don't
see it.
allow it to make the
Yeah.
impact that it could make.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think that's some of my block in that,
Yeah.
because when I have allowed it, back to the meditation piece, it works.
Yeah.
It
So the
puts
work
me in
then,
that spot.
is sort of like, what is it for you that doesn't want to let that in, right?
Sure.
There's a shield, there's a protection,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to be, and who knows what that, there's all sorts of places you
I
could.
got all kinds of issues. Don't
And
worry.
then where else in your life are you like that? Right? That's what I would ask the question. Like, where else are you wearing a protective shell?
Well, maybe you can't sit
people
next to me at the next Impact 11 event, because I think we'll dig in pretty
Right.
deep. And hey, so we're at time. This is, like I said, I told you that it's going to go fast, and it did.
Yeah.
Great conversation. I'd like to do it again, and get in more into some of the work and some of the depth of the work. But I was really intrigued by your use of music in this business environment. So,
Yeah.
and I think we got at least part of that. We scraped the surface of that. So, Vince, any parting shots that you want to?
Yeah, a couple of things to leave you with, Susan. I'm a 731 on Enneagram, if that
I
tells
figured you
you
were 7. I could
about
kind
me.
of tell.
And then interesting that you brought up Alzheimer's. That's a trigger for me. My dad passed of Alzheimer's, but it brought up also a really great memory because we would play Frank Sinatra for him all the time. Frank Sinatra was his favorite. And yeah, it would be the only time he would really light up. Right. And it's crazy the power of music, but and then Frank Sinatra has become so powerful for me because when I put Frank Sinatra on, then that's the memory, right? Like
Yes.
that's the but it's cool because it keeps, really when you think about that, music is the connection that I have to my dad. That's really important, right? So that's the power of it. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's really, really incredible. So thank you for I just want to thank you for opening that up. Because I, as music has been so prominent in my life, I never thought about how much I could bring it into more of my life to impact and potentially impact others. So that's really cool. And I would like to connect with you at some point later because I think my daughter would love to meet you and talk to you if you're open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also tell, your audience that if you're curious about the patterns, I have a 7-question quiz on susandrum.com. It's called Your Path to Enlightened Leadership. And we're using that both to understand what is your own superpower and what may be your liability, right? Because each one there's a superpower, but then there's sort of the kryptonite aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so you can find out for yourself. But the cool thing about it is what you'll get is not only sort of the results of that, but we will suggest to you which chapter, because I go through 9 different examples in this book, which chapter that might best relate to you, the story that I tell about that leader. And then there's a QR code to go to the playlist that they created. So it'll give you food for thought on creating your own.
Wonderful. I was going to ask you to tell people how to get a hold of you. It's Susan Drumm. That's 2 M's at the end of that. .com would be the easy way. Where could they pick up a copy of your book?
Oh, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amazon. If you I would encourage people just go on, search Susan Drumm or search the Leaders Playlist. You're going to find the book and pick up a copy.
Susan, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. This was fun for me and enlightening as well. So I'm going to be going in, doing some of the work, and then I'll be reporting back to you when I see you. Probably in March.
Couple weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So
sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Susan. Appreciate having you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. For everyone who's stayed this long, thanks for listening to the CEO podcast. And you can always get a hold of us at scottandvince@gmail.com. Questions, concerns, next topics you want to hear. There'll be some show notes down at the bottom so you can get a hold of Susan as well. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us for the CEO Podcast. Please visit us at theceopodcast.net, where you can learn more about our co-hosts and listen to past episodes. If you would like to have a discussion and dive deeper into any topic, there is also an option to contact Scott or Vince to schedule some time with them. Thanks for listening.